You had your chance.
This is my family now. Okay, let's execute this. This is the moment. Can I help you with anything over here? No, I'm good. Just finalizing the numbers. Looks like you're killing it. Good job. I never knew. How could you not?
I never thought I'd get to say this.
Thank you. You're welcome, Dad. Take care of yourself.
The funniest thing about being called useless, Ava Carter would later say, is watching the same people panic when they realize how wrong they were. On a bright Saturday afternoon in Cedar Grove, Ohio, a black luxury SUV rolled slowly down Maple Street and stopped in front of a familiar two-story house with white siding, blue shutters, and a porch that had seen better days. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A few stood outside pretending to water their lawns while quietly watching. Word had spread fast. Someone was buying the Carter house. For months, people had whispered about the family's financial troubles, the overdue notices, the missed payments, the rumors that the house might not stay in the family much longer. Nobody knew who the buyer was. The only thing anyone knew was that the deal had closed that morning. Inside the house, Robert Carter sat stiffly at the dining table, staring at a stack of papers he had already read a dozen times. Across from him sat his wife, Linda, nervously twisting a ring around her finger. Their son Jason paced near the kitchen window. Every few seconds he looked outside and then away again. The silence inside the house felt heavier than the summer air outside. Then the sound came. Car door opened. Jason froze. Linda looked toward the front window. Robert slowly stood up. Through the glass, they could see a young woman stepping onto the sidewalk. She wore a tailored navy blazer, simple gold earrings, and the calm confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Her long dark hair moved gently in the afternoon breeze as she looked up at the house. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with quiet certainty. None of them could see her face clearly yet, but something about her presence made the room feel smaller. Outside, neighbors watched with growing curiosity. The woman walked toward the front gate, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She paused for a moment and looked at the house. To everyone else, it was an aging property worth a few $100,000. To her, it was a place filled with memories she had spent years trying to forget. Memories of standing on that porch after school, hoping someone would ask how her day had gone. Memories of hearing her brother praised while her own achievements were ignored. Memories of family dinners where she felt more like a guest than a daughter. A year ago, she had stood in nearly the same spot with a worn suitcase and less than $400 in her bank account. Back then, nobody had believed she would succeed. Nobody had imagined she would ever come back. Especially not like this. Inside the house, Robert felt an uneasy knot forming in his stomach. He didn't know why. The buyer had every legal right to be there. This was simply business. Yet something felt strangely familiar. The woman finally reached the front steps. The afternoon sun reflected off the polished folder in her hand. She took a slow breath, looked directly at the front door, and smiled. Not the smile of someone seeking revenge. The smile of someone who had already won. The moment the smile appeared on the young woman's face, something stirred in Robert Carter's memory, but before he could place it, the doorbell rang. Nobody moved at first. Jason looked at his father. Linda looked at Jason. The second ring echoed through the house. Finally, Robert walked toward the door and pulled it open. The woman standing there met his eyes calmly. For a brief second, nobody spoke. Robert felt as though he knew her from somewhere, yet the polished appearance, the confidence, and the professional demeanor created a distance that made recognition impossible. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "I believe we have some paperwork to review." Her voice sounded familiar, but Robert was too distracted by the situation to understand why. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. As she crossed the threshold, her eyes quietly moved around the house. The staircase, the family photos, the old grandfather clock in the corner. Almost everything looked the same. The walls had been repainted, and some furniture had changed, but the feeling remained. 1,000 memories flashed through her mind. She remembered sitting at the dining table while Jason received praise for average accomplishments. She remembered bringing home excellent grades only to hear that they were expected rather than celebrated. She remembered school awards carefully placed on her bedroom shelf without anyone asking how much effort they had required. Most of all, she remembered learning very early that affection inside this house came with conditions. Linda offered a polite smile. "Would you like some coffee?" The woman thanked her and declined. Jason continued staring, trying to understand why she seemed strangely familiar. There was something in her eyes that bothered him, something he could not explain. The woman placed her folder on the dining table and sat down. The atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Nobody seemed eager to discuss the transaction directly. Outside, several neighbors continued watching from a distance, curious about the mysterious buyer. Inside, the silence grew heavier with every passing second. Finally, Linda forced a conversation. "You seem very young to be making investments like this." The woman smiled politely. "I started working earlier than most people expected." Jason laughed lightly. "You must have gotten lucky." The woman looked at him for a moment. "Some people call it luck. Others call it working every day when nobody is watching." Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Something about her answer felt personal. Robert opened the folder and reviewed several documents. Everything was in order. The signatures were complete. The transfer had been finalized. Legally, the property now belonged to the woman sitting across from them. He swallowed hard. For decades, he had believed the house would remain in the family forever. Now that certainty was gone. The woman remained calm while the others struggled with emotions they could not fully explain. She was not there to embarrass anyone. She was not there to celebrate their hardship. Yet simply sitting in that room created a tension none of them could escape. Then her eyes settled on a framed family photograph displayed on a nearby shelf. The picture had been taken years earlier. Robert, Linda, Jason, and a younger girl standing slightly off to the side. Her gaze lingered there for several seconds. Slowly, the color drained from Jason's face. For the first time, recognition began to emerge. He looked from the photograph to the woman sitting at the table and back again. Suddenly, his heartbeat quickened. A chill moved through the room as Jason stared at the photograph. The longer he looked, the more impossible it became to ignore. The eyes, the smile, the posture. Suddenly he whispered a single name. "Ava." The room fell silent. Linda's hand froze on the coffee cup. Robert slowly lifted his head. The woman sitting across from them did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked once more at the family photograph before turning back toward the table. A small smile appeared on her face. "It has been a while," she said softly. Linda's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Robert blinked several times as if trying to clear a fog from his memory. 1 year. It had only been 1 year, yet the young woman before them seemed like an entirely different person. The last time they had seen Ava, she looked exhausted, heartbroken, and uncertain about her future. The woman sitting here now carried herself with confidence and purpose. Jason leaned back in his chair. "This cannot be real." Ava remained calm. "I assure you it is." Nobody knew what to say next. The silence that followed was not caused by anger. It came from realization. For years, the family had built a narrative around Ava. She was the daughter who would never amount to much. The daughter who was always overlooked. The daughter who was expected to settle for less. That story had become so familiar that nobody ever questioned it. Now the evidence sitting before them shattered everything they believed. Robert finally spoke. "How did this happen?" Ava looked at him carefully. The question sounded simple, but she knew what he truly meant. How had the daughter they dismissed become the owner of the house they could no longer afford? She folded her hands together. "The answer is not complicated. I worked." Jason frowned. "People work every day." Ava nodded. "That is true. But not everyone keeps going after they are told they are worthless." Her words landed heavily. Nobody argued. Deep down, they knew she was right. Ava glanced around the room again. The house seemed smaller than she remembered. When she was younger, it had felt enormous. Back then, she believed the people inside it held the power to define her future. She had spent years trying to earn approval that never came. Every achievement felt invisible. Every effort felt insufficient. Looking back now, she realized how much energy she had wasted chasing validation from people who had already made up their minds about her. Robert lowered his eyes. Certain memories began resurfacing. School ceremonies he skipped. Conversations he rushed through. Moments when Ava needed encouragement but received criticism instead. At the time, those choices seemed insignificant. Now they felt much heavier. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly drifted lower in the sky. Neighbors continued watching, unaware of the emotional storm unfolding inside the house. Ava noticed the familiar crack near the living room archway. It had been there since she was a teenager. For a moment she remembered sitting beneath it one evening, listening to her family discuss plans for Jason's future while nobody asked about hers. That memory no longer hurt. It simply reminded her how far she had come. Then Robert quietly asked the question nobody else dared to ask. "Why are you here, Ava?" She looked directly into his eyes. Her answer came without hesitation. "Because before this house belongs to me completely, there is a story you need to hear." No one interrupted her. For the first time in years, Ava had their complete attention. She leaned back slightly and looked through the front window toward the quiet street outside. "The night I left this house, I thought my life was over," she began. Robert lowered his gaze. Linda sat motionless. Jason remained silent. Ava continued. "I remember standing outside with one suitcase and nowhere to go. I had less than $400, no apartment, and no idea what would happen next. What I did have was a choice. I could spend the rest of my life proving that you were right about me, or I could find out for myself whether you were wrong." The room remained still. Ava spoke calmly, without bitterness. "The first few weeks were difficult. I slept on a friend's couch. During the day I worked at a coffee shop. At night I cleaned office buildings. Some mornings I only slept 3 hours before starting over again. There were days when my feet hurt so much I could barely walk. There were nights when I sat alone wondering whether I would ever get ahead." She paused briefly. "But something strange happened. The farther away I got from this house, the more clearly I started hearing my own voice instead of everyone else's." Jason shifted uncomfortably. Ava noticed but continued. "For years I believed I was not good enough because that was what I heard over and over. Not directly every day. Sometimes it was in the comparisons. Sometimes it was in the silence. Sometimes it was in the way one child received encouragement while the other received expectations." Robert's shoulders sank. Ava was not raising her voice. That somehow made every word heavier. "One night after finishing a cleaning shift, I found a free online business course. I started studying after work. Every night, every weekend, every lunch break. While other people relaxed, I learned. While other people slept, I practiced. Nobody applauded. Nobody noticed. Nobody believed in me. But for the first time, I started believing in myself." Linda looked away. Ava smiled faintly at the memory. "My first project earned me $87. The second earned me $200. The third failed completely. Then another failed. Then another. I made mistakes. I lost money. I questioned myself more than once. But every setback taught me something. Eventually, the small projects became larger ones. The larger ones became clients. The clients became referrals. The referrals became a company." She opened the folder beside her and removed a photograph. It showed a modern office space filled with employees. She placed it on the table. Nobody touched it. "That company now employs 23 people," she said quietly. Jason stared at the image. Robert looked stunned. Linda seemed unable to speak. Ava folded her hands again. "The interesting part is that none of this happened because someone gave me a chance. It happened because I stopped waiting for permission to succeed." The afternoon sunlight stretched across the dining room floor. Outside, everything appeared normal. Inside, the foundation of an old family story was beginning to collapse. Then Ava looked directly at Robert and asked a question he had never expected to hear. Do you know what hurt the most? It was not leaving. It was realizing that none of you thought I could make it. The question lingered in the room long after Ava stopped speaking. Nobody answered because nobody could honestly deny it. Robert stared at the table while memories surfaced one after another. He remembered parent-teacher conferences where teachers praised Ava's discipline and intelligence. He remembered scholarship letters arriving in the mail. He remembered opportunities she had earned through hard work. At the time, he always assumed success would come naturally to her because she was responsible. His attention went elsewhere. Jason received encouragement because he seemed to need it more. Ava received expectations because she seemed strong enough to carry them. Looking back, Robert suddenly realized how unfair that had been. Ava watched the realization spread across his face. I spent a long time being angry, she admitted. Not because I struggled. Everyone struggles. I was angry because I spent years trying to prove my value to people who had already decided what I was worth. Linda finally found her voice. That was never our intention. Ava nodded slowly. I believe that, but intentions do not always change outcomes. The words landed gently, yet they carried enormous weight. Nobody argued. Ava continued. The hardest part was learning that I did not need your approval to build a life I was proud of. Jason leaned forward. Why did you never call? Ava looked at him. Would you have answered? Jason opened his mouth but could not respond. Deep down, he knew the truth. During that first difficult year, he had rarely thought about her. He had assumed she was getting by somewhere. He had assumed she would eventually come back. He had never imagined she was building something extraordinary. Ava glanced toward the stack of financial documents sitting on the table. I did not know about your situation until 6 months ago. Robert looked up. You knew. A former neighbor mentioned the house might be sold. At first I ignored it. Then I learned more. A heavy silence followed. The family understood exactly what she meant. Business investments had failed. Debts accumulated. Income disappeared faster than expected. One problem led to another until the house became impossible to keep. For months they fought to save it. Eventually there was no way out. Ava studied the faces around her. A year earlier she would have felt satisfaction seeing those who doubted her struggle. Instead she felt something entirely different. Perspective. The pain that once controlled her no longer held power over her decisions. Success had changed more than her financial circumstances. It had changed her heart. Do you know why I bought the house? She asked. Robert shook his head. Linda looked confused. Jason waited quietly. Ava smiled faintly. Everyone assumes it was because I wanted revenge. The truth is much simpler. She stood and slowly walked toward the living room. Her eyes moved across familiar walls filled with decades of family history. Childhood birthdays, holiday gatherings, graduation photographs, moments that could never be replaced. She turned back toward them. I bought this house because despite everything that happened here, it is still part of my story, and I was not willing to watch strangers erase it. For the first time that afternoon, tears appeared in Linda's eyes. Robert lowered his head. Jason stared at the floor. None of them expected those words. None of them expected grace from the daughter they had underestimated for so long. The emotion in the room shifted after those words. For the first time since Ava arrived, the conversation was no longer about money, ownership, or success. It was about something much deeper. Robert slowly stood and walked toward the living room window. He stared outside at the neighborhood he had lived in for more than 20 years. The houses looked the same. The trees looked the same. Yet everything felt different. I failed you, he said quietly. Ava looked surprised. Those were words she never expected to hear. Robert kept his eyes on the street. Not financially, not materially. I provided a home. I paid the bills. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing what you needed from me. The honesty in his voice filled the room. Linda lowered her head. Jason looked away. Ava remained silent, allowing him to continue. I thought being responsible was enough. I thought if you had food, education, and opportunities, then I was doing my job. I never realized how often you were standing right in front of me asking for something much simpler. Ava knew exactly what he meant. Encouragement, recognition, belief, things that cost nothing but meant everything. Robert turned around slowly. His eyes were filled with regret. I cannot change what happened. Ava nodded. No one can. Another silence followed, but this one felt different from the earlier silences. It no longer carried tension, carried reflection. Linda wiped her eyes carefully. I spent years thinking you were distant, she admitted. Now I realize you were protecting yourself. Ava gave a small smile. Sometimes those look very similar. Jason finally spoke. His voice sounded weaker than usual. I never understood what it was like for you. Ava looked at her brother. I know. Jason shook his head slowly. No, I really did not. I thought we had the same opportunities. I thought we were treated the same. Looking back now, I can see things I ignored. For years, Jason had benefited from attention he never questioned. Praise felt normal. Support felt normal. Opportunities felt normal. He never stopped to consider that his sister experienced the family differently. Ava appreciated the honesty. Growth rarely came from defending old mistakes. It came from recognizing them. She returned to the dining table and closed the folder. The business documents no longer mattered. The transaction was complete. What mattered now was what happened next. Robert watched her carefully. What are you going to do with the house? The question immediately drew everyone's attention. Ava thought for a moment before answering. I have had a year to think about that. She walked through the living room again, studying the familiar details. The worn staircase, the framed photographs, the marks on the wall where family memories had accumulated over time. Then she stopped and turned back toward them. When I bought this house, I gained the legal right to decide its future. But that was never the reason I wanted it. Robert frowned slightly. Linda looked confused. Jason leaned forward. Ava smiled gently. Success taught me something important. The greatest victories are not the ones that prove other people wrong. They are the ones that free you from needing to. The words settled over the room. Nobody spoke. For a long moment, all they could do was absorb what she had become. Not just successful. Not just accomplished. Strong. Strong enough to carry her past without letting it control her future. The silence that followed felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in many years, nobody in the room was trying to defend themselves. Nobody was trying to win an argument. They were simply confronting the truth. Ava walked toward the fireplace and picked up a framed photograph from the mantel. It showed a much younger version of the family standing together during a summer vacation. Everyone was smiling. Looking at the picture now, Ava realized something she had not understood when she was younger. Families were rarely defined by a single moment. They were built from thousands of choices made over time. Some choices brought people closer. Others created distance that slowly grew year after year. She carefully returned the photograph to its place. Robert watched her. I wish I could go back, he admitted. There are things I would do differently. Ava nodded. Most people feel that way eventually. Linda looked around the house and took a deep breath. When we first learned we might lose this place, I thought the house was the tragedy. Her voice trembled slightly. Now I realize the real tragedy was allowing relationships to become more fragile than the walls around us. Ava met her eyes. For the first time, she saw genuine understanding there. Not excuses. Not explanations. Understanding. Jason leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? Ava smiled softly. Of course. Did you ever hate us? The question surprised everyone. Even Jason seemed unsure whether he wanted the answer. Ava thought carefully before responding. There were moments when I was angry. There were moments when I was hurt. But hate is heavy. Carrying it would have slowed me down. Jason stared at the floor. Her answer somehow felt harder to hear than if she had admitted hatred. It revealed how much emotional distance she had traveled while the rest of them remained trapped in old assumptions. Outside, the neighborhood continued its ordinary Saturday routine. Children rode bicycles down the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life moved forward as it always did. Inside the house, however, something important was changing. Robert finally sat down again and looked directly at Ava. "I owe you an apology." Ava listened quietly. "Not because you became successful. Not because you bought this house. I owe you an apology because I should have believed in you long before any of that happened." The words hung in the air. Robert was not speaking to impress anyone. He was speaking because he finally understood. Ava could see it in his eyes. Years of assumptions had given way to clarity. Linda reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Robert's. Neither of them tried to justify the past. That mattered more than any apology. Ava slowly returned to her seat. The afternoon sunlight now filled the room with a warm golden glow. She looked around one more time. This house had witnessed disappointment, loneliness, and frustration. It had also witnessed resilience, growth, and lessons that shaped who she became. Then she opened her folder once more and removed a single sheet of paper. Robert noticed it immediately. Linda looked confused. Jason sat upright. Whatever was written on that page seemed important. Ava placed it on the center of the table and said quietly, "There is one more thing all of you need to know before I leave today." Everyone stared at the single sheet of paper resting on the table. The document looked ordinary, yet the seriousness in Ava's expression made it feel far more significant than any legal contract that had been discussed that afternoon. Robert adjusted his glasses and looked down at the page. Linda leaned closer. Jason shifted his chair forward. At the top of the document was a simple statement outlining a new housing agreement. For several seconds, nobody understood what they were reading. Then realization slowly appeared on their faces. Robert looked up first. "What is this?" Ava folded her hands calmly. "It is a lease agreement." Linda blinked in confusion. "A lease agreement?" Ava nodded. "For this house." The room fell silent again. Robert read the document a second time, slower this time. The terms were surprisingly simple. The monthly payment was modest. The duration was generous. The conditions focused on maintaining the property and keeping it in good condition. There was nothing punitive. Nothing designed to embarrass them. Nothing designed to make them suffer. Jason looked from the document back to Ava. "You are letting us stay?" Ava smiled softly. "This house means something to all of us. I did not buy it to force anyone out." Linda covered her mouth with one hand as emotion filled her eyes. She had spent months preparing herself for the possibility of losing everything familiar. The fear had followed her every day, every bill, every phone call, every letter in the mailbox. Now the possibility she feared most seemed to be disappearing. Robert slowly sat back in his chair. "After everything that happened, why would you do this?" Ava looked at the family photographs lining the walls. "Because I spent the last year learning the difference between justice and revenge." Nobody spoke. She continued. "Revenge would have felt satisfying for a few minutes, maybe a few days, but eventually I would still have to live with myself. Justice is different. Justice allows people to learn. Revenge only allows them to suffer." Robert lowered his head. Those words struck him deeply. Throughout his life, he had believed strength came from winning. Ava had discovered something far greater. Strength came from refusing to become the worst version of yourself when life gave you every reason to. Jason looked around the room. "I do not know if I deserve this." Ava answered immediately. "That is not the question." He frowned. "Then what is?" Ava met his eyes. "The question is what you do with the opportunity." The answer left him speechless. Outside, the evening sun had begun sinking toward the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the neighborhood. The atmosphere inside the house felt lighter than it had all day. Not because the past had disappeared. The past remained real. The mistakes remained real. The pain remained real. But something else had entered the room. Hope. Linda carefully touched the document again as though she could not quite believe it existed. Robert stared at Ava with a mixture of pride and regret. The daughter he once underestimated had become the strongest person in the family. Not because of her bank account, not because of her business success, because she possessed something much rarer. The ability to rise above old wounds without losing her compassion. Then Ava stood and picked up her purse. The conversation was nearing its end. But before she walked out that door, there was one final truth she wanted them to understand. The room remained quiet as Ava stood near the front door. The golden light of early evening filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody wanted to break the fragile honesty that had finally emerged after years of misunderstanding. Ava looked around the house one last time. Every corner held a memory. Some were painful. Some were comforting. Most were complicated. But none of them had the power to define her anymore. She turned toward her family and smiled gently. "There is something I learned during the hardest year of my life," she said. Robert, Linda, and Jason listened carefully. "The people who doubt you can only limit your future if you start believing them." The words settled deeply into the room. Ava continued, "For a long time, I thought my worth depended on being recognized by other people. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, or sacrificed enough, eventually someone would tell me I mattered. But real confidence begins when you stop waiting for permission to value yourself." Robert slowly nodded. He understood now. The daughter standing before him had not become successful because life suddenly became easy. She became successful because she refused to let other people's opinions become permanent truths. Ava glanced toward the family photographs on the wall. "I used to think leaving this house was the worst thing that ever happened to me." A faint smile crossed her face. "Now I realize it was the moment I finally started discovering who I was." Linda wiped away another tear. "I am sorry for the years we cannot get back." Ava walked closer and gently squeezed her hand. "We cannot change the years behind us, but we can decide what happens next." Those words seemed to lift a weight from everyone's shoulders. For the first time all afternoon, nobody was focused on regret. They were focused on possibility. Jason stood and looked directly at his sister. "I am proud of you." Ava could hear the sincerity in his voice. Years earlier, those words would have meant everything to her. Today, they simply felt meaningful. Not because she needed them, but because they were genuine. "Thank you," she replied. Robert stepped forward next. His eyes reflected both sadness and gratitude. "You became everything I should have known you could become." Ava smiled warmly. "Maybe, but the truth is, I did not become successful to prove anyone wrong. I became successful because I finally stopped trying to prove anything at all." The statement lingered in the air. It was the lesson at the center of everything she had learned. Success was not revenge. Success was freedom. Freedom from old labels. Freedom from old fears. Freedom from the need to earn approval that should have been given freely in the first place. Outside, the neighborhood lights began turning on as evening arrived. Ava opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. She paused for one final moment before leaving. Looking back, she saw three people who were no longer trapped by the same assumptions that had divided them for years. Healing would take time. Trust would take time. But something important had begun. Robert, Linda, and Jason stood together in the doorway, watching her walk down the path. As Ava reached her vehicle, she glanced back at the house and smiled. A year earlier, she had left carrying a suitcase and uncertainty. Today, she left carrying peace. And in the end, that was worth far more than any house could ever be.
Before the story ends, take a moment to think about the lesson of the video. Many people judge the other based on where they are today. They look at people's struggle, mistake, or temporary failure and decide the person's future for them. But life rarely works that way. A quiet child who feels ignored may become the strongest adult in the room. A person who is underestimated may become the one who created the opportunity tomorrow. What makes Ava's story meaningful isn't that she became successful, But it is successful doesn't change her. She came back to the place that hurt her, not with anger, but with confidence, not with revenge, but with truth. Maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. Success is not proving someone wrong. Success is become the person that you promised yourself you would be, even when nobody believed in you. So, if you are going through the difficult season right now, remember this. Your current situation is not your final chapter now. Keep growing, keep learning, keep believing. One day, the people who overlooks your value may finally see what was there all along. And when that day comes, let your success speak louder than your pain. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe and share to the people that you think they need it. Thanks for watching.